Please, Ms Saw.
Thank you, Chair. We've got apologies from Councillor Moyes, of which Councillor Crozier is substituting, and we have apologies from Councillor Spetague and Councillor Cheadle is substituting. Thank you.
Thank you, and I know that Councillor Cheadle did substitute at very short notice, so just for sort of transparency, really, are you able to confirm that you have been able to read the papers and inwardly digest? Lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much. Item 2, declarations of interest. Does anybody have any interest to declare? Nope, looks like not. Thank you. Item 3, items requiring urgent attention. Well, I don't have any. And item 4 is the confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of December. Everybody happy if I sign them as a true and accurate record? Pages 1, 2, 3. Anybody any issues? So everybody happy? They're signed.
Right, yeah.
Lovely. Thank you. We are going to, because Mr Staples, who is doing the licensing report, is still caught up, so we will bring forward items 6 and item 7. So the planning appeals update, which is on page 91 of your agenda. Ms Houselander, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. We've just got one appeal which has actually been lodged by Mr Blackburn. There was a planning application for the erection of 3 dwellings, and that was refused based on the impact on the character of the area and also on the basis of the impact of the development on a protected tree. So that's now been lodged, so we will wait and see what the inspector has to say about that. I just wanted to also update you, 3 appeal decisions came in yesterday in relation to West Devon. So the first one was at Higher Narracott. It was the change of use of 2 buildings from barns to dwellings. It was actually a prior approval application, so it wasn't a planning application, it was a prior approval application, and the planning officer at the time felt that the structural survey provided did not indicate that the buildings were capable of being converted, which is one of the requirements of the Town and Country Planning General Permitted Development Order Class Q. And so that was why it was refused. The other reason was because of the proximity of the other agricultural buildings, and there was a concern that if people were living in those barns, then the agricultural activities would impact on their living conditions. The inspector allowed the appeal and felt that because there were 2 structural surveys, they didn't go into masses of detail, but the inspector was of the view that they didn't need to go into masses of detail. The legislation doesn't require them to. On that basis, they didn't agree with the officer about the extent of the structural survey. And they also acknowledged that 2 of the other barns within the group of agricultural buildings had already been given prior approval to be converted to residential. Excuse me, sorry. And as a result of that, the likelihood of intensive agricultural operations in that group was very low, and therefore she allowed the 2 barns to be converted. The other application was at Thorndon Cottage, which was an application for a new agricultural barn. It was refused by the planning officer on the basis that it was in an incredibly prominent location within the landscape, and it was isolated, so it wasn't next to any other agricultural buildings. And so it was, the inspector agreed with the officer and felt that it was too prominent, and therefore the appeal was dismissed. And the third one was at Crossroads Farm at Lewdown, an application for 22 dwellings, which was refused by the officer on the basis that it was in an unsustainable location, the design was inadequate, and the impact on the character of the landscape. The inspector did not agree about the sustainable location, but did agree that the impact of the development on the character of the area was significant, and therefore dismissed the appeal.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairman. Going back to High Narrowcut, I was a little bit concerned that there seemed to be we approved 2 of the barns. My reading of the report was from the inspector, and yet we refused the other one. Is that correct? Or
Yes.
I misread that? Yes. So
Yes, it is correct.
why did we come to that conclusion? Because it seems a bit of a, to put it bluntly, a bit of a dog's dinner. It must have been when the planning inspector picked it up.
Well, yes, I think the planning inspector did make that point
Yeah.
in his response. I think some of the barns were much closer together,
Yeah.
and so that might have been one of the reasons why they were allowed. And I think there was a bigger gap between the barns that had remained, and so were remaining in agricultural use. And so that might have been the reason, but. Without going into the officer's report in matters of detail, I wouldn't be able to answer you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Cheadle.
Just going back to the last appeal you mentioned about the inspectors not agreeing on sustainable location issues. Just a general question. When that happened, I mean, I thought we had a fairly sort of good way of deciding whether something is a sustainable location or it isn't. When an inspector judges against us, do we go back and revisit our criteria for what could be a sustainable location and what might not be?
Oh, yes, we do. The way we rehearse that is we, at our next available team meeting, the officer gives a summary of what's happened, and then also then does look back and make a comment, if you like, about whether or not the officer feels the inspector has made the right conclusion, because sometimes inspectors don't always get it completely right. Certainly with this one, our strategic planners, and it was my application and myself, felt that it was not a sustainable location, and I suspect because of the other development adjacent, that may have influenced the inspector's view. And as far as I'm aware, the other development, which is obviously nearing completion, was granted at a time when we didn't have a 5-year housing land supply, and so our housing policies were quite weak at that point. And so because it was in 2016, I think that the outline was granted. So I suspect that at that time, we had no choice but to grant it because we didn't have a strong housing argument. Whereas now, with the JLP and the fact that we've got I think it's a 5.9% housing, a 5-year housing land supply, we're now in a much stronger position to argue some of those sites.
Yeah, I mean, it happens the other way around as well. We've had an application which was deemed to be sustainable because there was a local shop and a bus route, neither of which now exist in that location. So it might have been sustainable at the time of the application, but judged today against the same criteria, it probably wouldn't be sustainable. Oh, too late now, the houses are built. But it's important that we keep these sort of definitions sort of up to date, I guess.
And certainly appeal decisions do have an impact on how we implement or use those policies in the future, definitely.
Presumably feed into potential policy development going forward as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on appeals? Nope. Okay, in that case, we will move on to item 7, which is the update on the undetermined major applications. Again, this is really just for members to question update on progress rather than the merits of the case. So I know Councillor Crozier had a question, so I'll bring you in with yours first, if I may.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to do with the former Hazelton Preparatory School, which was heard in September last year. The result of that meeting, there were 2 meetings to be had, one with Sport England and one with the architects, is it? Yes, the architects on design details. Have those meetings taken place?
One of them has. The one was it's really hard to get hold of Sport England. I've sent several emails and phone calls and not received a response. However, I had a meeting last week with the architects, and we spent a considerable amount of time looking at the detail of the design, and we also looked at there were two reasons for refusal relating to the dwellings. One was in relation to the housing need, and the other was in relation to the design of the actual physical design. So we spent a long time looking at that, and certainly if they come forward with the design that we discussed, which was setting the dwellings down, so lowering the height of the dwellings, setting them much closer together, so that they almost read as a series of workers' houses, like you would have seen in in an estate scenario, in the past, so that's what we discussed. That's what when I left the meeting, I was satisfied that they had overcome some of the design reasons, and so, but I await the plans before I can confirm that, because I think they had to go back to their client to make sure that they were happy.
That sounds promising. Can Sport England be given a deadline to come to a meeting or not? Because 4 months have elapsed and they haven't been able to meet with you.
Yeah, I can certainly do that.
Yeah, I think that should be the case. Thank you.
Any other questions on the undetermined majors? No? Okay, right, thank you very much. We can now move back to item 5, which is the licensing committee report, which is on page 5 of your agenda. And welcome to Mr. Staples. Glad you made it through the snow, ice, and goodness knows what else. And over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Apologies for being a few minutes late there, and thank you for changing the agenda around for me at the last minute. What you have before you here today is a fairly simple proposal when it comes to sort of taxi reports. We've had a number of conversations with key people from the trade. Nobody's saying there's anything wrong with the policy as such. The policy itself obviously came into force the 1st of April 2018. And with the best will in the world, nobody could foresee the changes that were going to happen between sort of now and then, both globally and locally. And we've got a number of factors that are coming into play, in particular, the really, really significant rises in the second-hand car prices. And that would have a material impact on the ability of people that work in the taxi trade at the moment to change their vehicles. Likewise, we have the cost of living crisis and everything else there, and the ongoing impact on the taxi trade of COVID, which has led to, across the country, a reduction in the number of licensed drivers and licensed vehicles. So we've got these competing factors. The policy as written, quite rightly and properly, emphasises safety, and it would still be considered good practice to have the NCAP safety standards or similar specified in the policy, because they're based entirely around safety. It's all to do with the crash test and the safety features of the vehicle, and they've progressed through time as well. So as more safety features become available in on modern vehicles, the bar to get that 4 and 5 rating on the NCAP rating increases accordingly, basically, with this. So the policy as written is, in my opinion, quite right and proper. What we do have a problem with is these, as I say, these competing issues that have come to light over the last couple of years that are going to impact on the ability of the trade to change their vehicles at the current time. So the feeling from officers is it would be quite appropriate to consider a delay in the implementation of the changeover for existing vehicles. So the policy as written would stay the same for anybody putting a new vehicle onto circuit, but the proposal put before you today would delay the impact of any changes of vehicles on the West Devon fleet. I'll just run through the recommendations for you, and they are that the licensing committee consider the following proposed change to the policy. That section 17 of the policy is amended to delay the implementation of the requirement for currently licensed vehicles to hold a Euro NCAP safety rating of 4 or 5 stars out of 5 from the 1st of January this year to the 1st of January 2024, or a later date as you direct us. And secondly, we recommend to the council that the draft Hackney Carriage and Private Hire policy, as amended, is adopted at the meeting in February. And I'm more than happy to take any questions on this. Thank you.
Thank you. And just as a reminder to members, of course, we've actually the policy has gone through this committee, so it is really only the section 17 that we're looking at today. I had a couple of questions, which was one, have our current local taxi drivers being consulted with regarding the deadline that we have here, and if they come back and said that it's not something that they can achieve?
Yeah, the team throughout the latter part of last year had numerous conversations with members of the trade expressing concern about this. It's a significant turnover of vehicles that this would happen, basically, if this wasn't changed. And the feeling from the team, from the people that I've spoken to, is that this would cause some significant kind of financial difficulty for certain members of the trade. And they're quite open about the fact that they feel that things are still recovering from COVID. People aren't going out as less, and obviously the ongoing financial crisis means that those kind of Friday and Saturday night fares are, sort of becoming more limited because people are going out less as well. So it's an all-round kind of fairly gloomy picture for them like that, and this would put them under some significant stress, is the feeling that we've got from the customers that we speak to.
So any new taxi drivers coming on stream would be still required to comply with the required standard of 4 or 5?
Yes, so the proposal here would only relate to those vehicles that are already on circuit working as taxis. So effectively, we're recommending giving them an extension of time, basically, to continue their usage. And the hope with that is twofold. That firstly, that the situations I've outlined improve slightly. In particular, as we move further away from the kind of major impact of COVID, hopefully more new vehicles will be available, and that will then lead to a corresponding reduction back to kind of more normal levels for second-hand car market. So that's the kind of first thing. And secondly, it would give them more time to prepare and to save up at a period of time when money's tight.
Okay, and at what level are they required to have at the moment? So the existing taxi drivers, what level of safety rating are they required to have now, or isn't there one?
No, for existing vehicles, this is a new requirement. So this would be upon change of the vehicle. So as I say, the NCAP standards change over time. They get more and more stringent as you go along. So vehicles that would have been a 5-star rated vehicle 5 years ago would only achieve a 3-star rating now under the scheme, because of the more technological advancements as well. So that's the reason to, we're not proposing to get rid of this. We think that it's a really good thing to have in the policy. It evolves over time. It keeps safety at its core. It's just that concern about exactly when it's going to impact those existing vehicles that we would like to make the committee aware of.
Councillor Ratcliffe and Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. My concern with this is, are we going to be having a similar conversation in 12 months' time? It's only, I believe in here you mentioned that approximately 15% of the current vehicles have reached that standard. I am quite worried that it is safety of the public, and I don't think it's really what the conditions are in the country within a year's time, and maybe it won't have changed that much. So I am a little concerned. Can I have your thoughts on that, please?
No, I completely understand your concerns there. what we're not saying is that any of those vehicles that existing vehicles are unsafe. They go through a series of checks, they're inspected, so all the kind of material safety aspects of it are covered by the licensing process. It's just that they're not going to be to the same kind of technological safety standards. For example, kind of the modern vehicles would have lane awareness software that will beep at you if you're drifting out of lane and things like that. ABS brakes are becoming more and more common, those sorts of features. So it's the kind of technological advancement that this policy point will help to keep in mind basically with this. I completely understand your concern about having a conversation in a year's time. We're not proposing here to have this as an open-ended thing. What we would like is to regularly review it. So we recognise the importance of this policy point. It's one of the key planks of your policy. So we certainly wouldn't want to be leaving this for any significant period of time. So we would be amenable to bringing this back to committee for further review towards the end of the year, for instance, if you were minded to approve an extension to the 1st of January 2024. To see if that was still valid and keep it under review, essentially.
Councillor Mott.
Thank you, Chair. I share the same concerns as Councillor Ratcliffe, because this policy has been in existence from 2018, where it's very clear that all new vehicles must comply with that from 2018. It's also very clear in there that all vehicles must meet this deadline by the 1st of January 2023. So this isn't a new thing that they haven't been unaware of. So while I can sympathise with the efforts behind the recommendation, I'm struggling to understand why they're not complying with it, or why they are saying there's a struggle. I personally cannot see the second-hand car market changing between now and next year, because there aren't new petrol cars coming on the market. There aren't going to be new diesel cars. Everything is shifting over to electric, and therefore we are all having to embrace this. I sympathise with all of the struggles that everybody is going through, but I'm struggling at the moment to justify the recommendation. So I'm just curious on why, if they've known about it for the last 5 years, why there is now this sudden need to delay the implementation of it.
Thank you. Absolutely valid point. The conversations that we started to have came out of correspondence that we put out, informing the trade and reminding them that the deadline was coming up. And then we started to have more and more conversations with people. And the sorts of conversations that we were having were along the lines of drivers were saying to us that they'd earned very, very little through the period of COVID, and they hadn't financially recovered, and they just weren't in a position to change that vehicle. Prior to the impact of COVID, which, obviously none of us went very far during that point, a number of drivers were saying, they had a plan, they were putting money aside, they knew the vehicle change was coming up, and those funds just had to be diverted into day-to-day living costs, unfortunately. So the picture that they paint is that we've had these, as the report states, these kind of competing issues that have all come at once that have impacted on their ability to change the vehicles. And that's not to say that every driver will. And what you say about the move over to electric vehicles and in particular hybrid vehicles, because of the high fuel prices, we will see that. And I think that if the policy was delayed for a year, I think there would be a reasonable expectation that that percentage of vehicles that would still need to change towards the end of this year would start to come down, because people will some drivers that are in a better financial position will change those vehicles, and they will be looking predominantly at hybrid vehicles. Electric vehicles are still, in the conversations we're having, not really where the trade are looking to go, actually. In fact, the trade publications around taxis are saying that diesel vehicles are still where they want to go, just because the charging network's not mature enough at the moment. So I think it will naturally creep down, that percentage of vehicles that still need to change, basically, the longer this goes on, if you were minded to do that. to reassure you like that. I think there will be a degree of natural change.
Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. I can see the reasoning behind this delay. My concerns are that the general economy may not improve a great deal from what it has been the last 12 months. And by pushing the can down the road for 12 months, you know, we could find that finances are a lot tighter in 12 months' time than they are now. It's a very difficult one, but, you know, this has been on the cards for the last 4.5, 5 years. And I just feel that, you know, we should have been a lot stronger in, I know we've had COVID to deal with, and as they have, the owners and drivers, but my concern is, as the previous speakers, I also have concerns on how we would be viewed as an authority if one of the older vehicles, say one of the older vehicles that's used as a taxi, was involved in a serious accident, which might not be their fault, and there were serious injuries or fatalities. If we don't have this policy in place at that time, could there be repercussions on the authority from the insurance company of that private hire or taxi?
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Again, you know, a very valid point. The vehicles that are on circuit at the moment still pass their MOTs, they still pass their enhanced vehicle inspections, so that they are held to a higher standard of vehicle inspection and mechanical safety than your average vehicle that people are driving around in. So the safety point, we are comfortable with that. This policy, when you brought it in 2018, was very forward-looking. You had a number of elements with this that would still now be considered good practice for licensing authorities. So you're in a fortunate position where you are kind of ahead of the curve. So I'd reference the most recent draft Department for Transport best practice document. So it's only a draft that's out at the moment, but it's pointing licensing authorities towards this sort of policy point and a focus on safety via these sorts of standards being referenced in policy. So what you would find across the country is not that many, and I've looked at lots of different councils' policies on taxis. I work for a number of authorities. What you would find is this would still be a fairly uncommon policy point. And I think what you will see over time is more and more licensing authorities will move towards this sort of policy wording, actually. So I still think you are ahead of the curve in this. You already have this in your policy. The points that Councillor Pearce raised around if there was an accident, no, there wouldn't be implications on the basis that that vehicle would be safe and roadworthy because of the checks we have. It just wouldn't have as much of the modern safety equipment on the vehicle necessarily as a car that would be 4 or 5 rated on the NCAP scheme at the moment.
That's Crozier.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, we've been talking in percentages, it's not numbers. What size is the West Devon fleet, and how many of those people are single owner drivers, and how many of them are fleet owners?
I'm going to look at my colleague at the back of the room here. Welcome back, Naomi, by the way.
Did you want to come up and join us, because we'll need you to use your microphone?
Didn't hear either. Thank you. I was asking for the number of cars in the West End fleet.
Oh, right,
and how
yes.
many are owner drivers and how many are operated by fleets.
So I can tell you there's roughly about 100 vehicles. That's Hackney Carriage and private hire combined. There are only roughly 5 of those are private hire. I can't tell you. Unfortunately, it would be very difficult for us to be able to give you an exact number on how many are driver-owned, operated one-man band operations as opposed to companies. that isn't the way our system kind of records it. It would take a little while for us to be able to get those figures for you. I'm happy to do that if that would be of any interest, but we can't bring that up, unfortunately, the way it's recorded.
It would be a high percentage, though, in an area like West Devon. Typically, where owner drivers. So where you have a predominance of Hackney carriage vehicles, there is typically a predominance of owner drivers. Whereas private hire vehicles, there would often be a degree of 50-50 where the vehicle is owned by the operator and effectively rented. I would be surprised if there's much use of that model in West Devon.
Yeah, majority of them are self-employed as such, even if they work for a company.
Chairman, this is very interesting information because I'm of the knowledge that there's at least 2 multiples working in the borough. I think we're a little bit weak on knowing exactly how the industry operates within West Devon.
I have 2 or 3 questions myself, but if anybody else wants to come in. First of all, is it currently a statutory requirement that vehicles are at this level of safety? So it's not a statutory requirement?
It's not a statutory requirement. It would fall into the best practice guidance that's come out, and it wasn't in the previous best practice guidance iteration. But it does feature in the new proposed best practice guidance. So as I say, you're still ahead of the curve in that respect. That your policy already referenced that, and a few other things that have come into the best practice guidance back in 2018 already.
Another question it would be that if people actually do change their vehicle, is there a requirement, even if we were to defer the imposition of this, can we stipulate that if they change their vehicle prior to the 1st of January 2024, that it would need to be at the required standard?
Yes, so anybody that changes their vehicle voluntarily, or if they had an accident or the vehicle, their existing vehicle, the engine blew up or anything like that, anybody that changes their vehicle would be required to meet the current standard, so a 4 or a 5 rating on the NCAP rating. The delay would only be to those vehicles that are still on circuit, still operational and working and safe already anyway.
And do we know how many vehicles we are? I know you've said we have approximately 100 vehicles actually registered, but of those, how many of them are not at that standard already?
I believe it's roughly 15%, so about 15.
So we're looking at about 15 vehicles
between 10
out of
and
the
15.
out of the 100 vehicles that aren't at that required percentage.
Can you use your microphone?
It is on.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, I think you need.
They're having difficulty down there
Yeah.
hearing. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so playground voices, I think, into the microphone, please.
Yes, as the report says, it's roughly 15% of the fleet that would be affected.
And also, what would the effect be on the number of taxis that would be available to the public then if the committee does not defer the implementation? So that would be 15% would effectively
it would be reduced,
taken
yes.
out of service, potentially out of work.
Yes, obviously it would be a varied amount of time, depending on how quickly the drivers would be able to replace them, or whether they would at all, depending on their financial situation.
And what would be the amount of time that would normally be if it wasn't implement, if we didn't if we didn't go along with this recommendation, there would need to be a time, wouldn't there, to allow the taxi drivers to comply? And what would that be looking at? How much time would we be looking at?
We'd have to write to those vehicles that were affected, those vehicle owners that were affected, and advise them that the policy was being implemented, and therefore that their vehicle wouldn't be able to continue working ultimately. So that would be a fairly quick turnaround. The people we've spoken to are aware that we were putting a proposal through to committee. They understand that the committee may approve our recommendation or not. So there has been ongoing dialogue with the trade. So strictly speaking, the policy as is would apply, and that would mean their vehicles would come off of circuit, in short time.
okay with the associated impact on people's livelihoods as well. Anybody, any other questions? Ah, right, I have got Councillor Cheadle, and then I think, do you have another question, Councillor Pearce? Right, Councillor Cheadle, then Councillor Pearce.
Thank you.
Oh,
I've got a
Councillor
question.
Southcott, sorry.
I've got a question not on the specific recommendation in the paper, but it's in the paperwork nevertheless. There's a timetable here for the adoption of a draft policy, which is, I find sort of curious that we're adopting a draft policy. Normally we would have a draft, go through it, and then it would become a policy and we would adopt it. But we're being asked to adopt a draft policy. Is that the case?
It's an amendment to the policy. So you're approving the proposed amendment. So apologies if the wording is confusing there.
So it's not a... Once adopted, it's our policy. It's not a draft policy.
Absolutely.
Well, I would argue that the text at 3.1 and 3.2 doesn't reflect that. But it's a small point. And,
I think what we're doing,
just ask you to note that.
we're recommending to the council, we're recommending to full council that the draft Hackney Carriage, that it's amended and that they adopt it. So we're recommending it still as draft policy. We're not approving it. It's just a recommendation. It's a technicality. I will bring Councillor Southcott in and then Councillor Pearce, because Councillor Pearce already asked once. Councillor Southcott.
Thank you, Chair. My question was going back a bit. What precedent has been set by other councils within England on this policy?
So I've looked at an awful lot of council policies on this sort of point. I would say the majority of council policies still aren't focused around things like the NCAP standards. They're focused around the age of the vehicles in particular, or in some cases, particularly urban localities, on the emissions rating of the vehicles. And I think that there will be a continuing shift in council's policies towards a safety-focused policy such as this, possibly with emissions ratings as well. So that's the two kind of sort of trajectories I would say at the moment. So I think your policy, like I said, was one of very few that would reference the NCAP standards that I'm aware of currently. The only policy in Devon that makes reference to that currently. Other policies in Devon are, as I've said, either age-related or related to emissions.
Thank you.
Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairman. That is a response has thrown up something else. So surely the emissions are covered by the standard MOT on vehicles?
So the emissions rating, so part of the MOT is a check of your vehicle's emissions, and it has to be within the parameters there. But the emissions side of things, what we're looking at there would be a lowering of the CO2 emissions in particular, and the council's trying to use policies to shift their taxi trade across to lower emission and particular kind of ultra low emission vehicles, particularly in urban areas where they have significant problems with air quality. So that's the kind of shift there, whereas the MOT test is whether it's within the parameters for that vehicle, and whether it's operating efficiently. So this would be you might recall the Volkswagen scandal where they had software that recognised the vehicle was on a rolling road. That caused a lot of councils that had emissions-based targets within their policy problems, because suddenly the emissions levels for all of the kind of models that were on the market got re-evaluated, and some of them went up quite considerably, and that meant there was, for some councils, that was a difficulty because there was a shortage of vehicles that would be able to achieve the emissions they were looking for in their policy. So that's where that's going. I think more and more councils, particularly in urban areas, will have those sorts of policies in place, less so for the more rural authorities.
Okay, thank you. If I could have my original question now, Chairman. We've heard that there's 15% of the vehicles that won't meet the new standards of our fleet in West Devon. have those owners been told that they will have to meet the requirements if this policy is delayed for 12 months? Have you had a conversation to say that they will have to have suitable vehicles in place by January 24? Because, you know, I would hate that we agree the recommendation that's being put forward and it's deferred or they're delayed for 12 months, and then we find we get to January 24 and there's still 10 of those owners who've done nothing. So, I mean, I think you as officers need to make it quite clear, if members do agree the recommendation, and we don't know what, even if we recommend the, or agree the recommendation, it goes to full council, it may get thrown out there. So, you know, I think you need to make it quite clear to those 15 owners that they need to get their act together.
Absolutely, no, we totally understand that, and the reason why we're here today is because we'd communicated with those drivers to say, look, the policy is coming into effect, you need to have a plan in place here, and that's how these conversations and the drivers then you know, sort of told us their difficulties with it as it stands, essentially. So we would be in contact with them and make sure that they're aware. And we would also obviously make sure that they're aware if the proposal was approved, that the committee, you know, looked at this very seriously, and you know there may not be further extensions to this. We would be perfectly clear with this. Obviously, it's something that could be reviewed at any point, but no, we would have an open and clear dialogue with those members of the trade that were likely to be affected.
Yes, thank you. How many of the 85% have renewed their vehicle to meet this regulation or this change of policy? Have you any idea that any, you know, how many have possibly changed their vehicle to meet what the requirement is coming in?
I couldn't give you an exact figure on that, I'm afraid, because it would be based on kind of anecdotal kind of conversations we've had. A number of the vehicles were already 4 or 5 star rated when we brought the vehicle policy in 2018. So it would just be the vehicles that people have bought since then as new vehicles that have then had to meet that policy. But like I said, a number of them already did meet that standard. So I couldn't tell you exactly who, you know, the number had to buy specific vehicles to meet the policy. We haven't been told anecdotally that there were a vast number of people that were rushing to get them at the end of last year or anything. As I said, as Lee's mentioned, if anything, it was more people saying it was going to be difficult to do that. So I think the majority of them already had vehicles prior to kind of last year when the cost of living crisis seemed to hit.
Thank you, Naomi. Thank you, Chairman.
Any further questions, anybody? Well done, you all asked a lot of questions. Okay, well, in that case, I'm going to move the recommendations. I'm going to read it out, though, because I'm aware that there may be people watching on the live stream, and this possibly may not make much sense if they haven't got the agenda in front of them. So the recommendation is that the Licensing Committee, 1, considers the following proposed change to the Hackney carriage and private hire policy, that Section 17 of the policy is amended to delay the implementation of the requirement for currently licensed vehicles to hold a Euro NCAP safety rating of 4 or 5 stars out of 5 from 1st of January 2023 until 1st of January 2024, or a later date as directed by the committee, and that 2, we recommend to Council that the draft Hackney carriage and private hire policy as amended is adopted at the meeting on the 21st of February 2023. Is there a seconder, please?
Happy to second, Chairman.
Thank you. We are in debate, members. Councillor Mott.
Chair, if I may, for the interest of clarity, can I suggest that we say that it's section 17.3 of the policy, because that is the section that we are actually looking at, and also that we remove the word draft from recommendation 2.
Is it 17.1B or 17.1B and 17.3? Need some clarification on that. Mr. Fairbairn is with us, so I don't know if he's able to come in.
My reading of it, Chair, would be 17.3 because that's the point that actually deals with the date of the implementation.
I would agree with that. It does state that in that section.
Okay, so that would be the amendment that's at section 17.3. And that the recommendation is to council that the Hackney carries rather than the draft. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Are you happy with that one?
Yeah.
Does a seconder? Right, fine. So we delete the word draft from there as well. Right. Any debate? Members, did you wish to speak in debate as well, Councillor Mott, or no? Okay. Anybody else? Any debate? I will kick off by saying that essentially if we decide to go with this recommendation, that it will be absolutely clear, I think, to the public or to the drivers as well, that they will need to comply by the 1st of January 2024. Otherwise, that will be the end sort of thing, to make sure that actually we are giving a leeway, because it is 15% of existing, that we're giving that leeway to enable them to actually comply. So yeah, well, yes, that would be, yeah. Councillor Crosby, did you have your hand up? Right.
Thank you, Chair. No, I would thoroughly agree. This is a one-off. It's such a small number of vehicles, unfortunately. But, you know, we must give them a chance. And hopefully they can all comply within the 12 months.
Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with Councillor Crozier. You know, it is a one-off. We've had a very difficult situation. When you look at the numbers of taxi owners, drivers that have, you know, some 22,000 left the industry because of COVID, and since COVID, it's quite scary. We don't want to be in a situation where we are removing taxis from the pool of our fleet in West Devon, which could endanger residents if there were, you know, are not enough taxis available. So I think it's getting the balance right. One thing I would ask is whether we put a date for officers to chase these 15 people by to ensure that they've got new vehicles in place. And I'm just wondering whether we say that by the 31st of October, we would expect officers to be making very strong recommendations to these 15 people that they need to get their act together before the 1st of January 2024. Thank you.
Thank you. I have got Councillor Southcott.
Yes, this a one-off it's got to be just a one-off if we go this, and yes, it's got to be chased. The other thing I'd like to see is that your records actually cover what cars are licensed properly from the point of view, are they compliant right from day one? And any changes are recorded. So you can actually give us statistics to say, yes, that car is compliant or that one isn't, you know, the actual numbers.
We can give you that information of how many are of the rating required and how many aren't, because 15%, as stated, don't meet that requirement currently. So we can give you that information at the moment. I'm not sure what information you're referring to.
You seemed a bit vague just now on how many vehicles were actually compliant at this moment in time.
I can find that for you, but it would take a few moments. We have that information, but I don't have the exact figure until I run the report for you, which I can do if you like.
Is that going to make any difference how you vote? Do you need that information?
No, I'll take it. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else wish to speak? No. Okay, so we've got the recommendation with including it as 7.3, deleting. Oh, sorry, Councillor Crozier.
As a result of the question asked by Councillor Southcott, I would like that information to be given before we have the full council meeting.
Okay, so to be provided at full council.
Of course, yeah, that's no problem.
Thank you. Okay, good point. Yep. So we have the recommendation, which is to 7.3, remove the word draft with a deadline of 31st October for officers to be putting that sort of final push on people to actually make the change if they haven't already. Okay, all those in favour, please show.
It's unanimous, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for a very thorough debate on this one. This is when we don't have any planning applications. So thank you, and I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.